The year was 1683. Over 300,000 Ottoman soldiers stood at the gates of Vienna, ready to end Christian civilization forever. No city in Europe had ever faced such an overwhelming force. What happened next would change the course of human history completely. This is the story of 60 days that shook the entire world. A desperate siege and one miraculous, impossible last-minute rescue. But before we talk about the battle, we need to understand the empire that launched the most terrifying military campaign in history. The Ottoman Empire at its peak was the most powerful force on earth, stretching from North Africa to the heart of Europe. For centuries, Ottoman sultans had dreamed of one conquest above all others: the capture of Vienna, the golden heart of Christian Europe. Vienna was not just a city. It was the symbol of everything the Ottoman Empire wished to conquer, control, and ultimately destroy. If Vienna fell, the entire Christian West would collapse like dominoes. Every king in Europe knew this terrifying truth all too well. And now, in the blazing summer of 1683, that ancient nightmare was finally becoming real. The greatest army in history had arrived. Stay with us, because what you are about to hear will leave you speechless, breathless, and forever changed as a human being. To truly understand the siege of Vienna, we must travel back to the year 1453, the most dramatic turning point in history. That was the year Sultan Mehmed II finally conquered mighty Constantinople, ending the 1,000-year Byzantine Empire in one devastating, unforgettable afternoon. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves across all of Europe. Suddenly, the Ottoman war machine seemed completely unstoppable to every frightened ruler. Over the next 2 centuries, the Ottoman armies swept through the Balkans, Hungary, and deep into the bloodlands of Central Europe relentlessly. In 1529, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent himself led the first great siege of Vienna, but winter and plague forced him to retreat. Vienna survived that time, but every Ottoman sultan after Suleiman carried the same burning obsession to finish what the great man started. By the late 1600s, a new and incredibly ambitious Grand Vizier named Kara Mustafa Pasha seized control of the Ottoman military machine. Kara Mustafa was a ruthless, calculating, and supremely confident commander who deeply believed that his personal destiny was the conquest of Vienna. He personally convinced Sultan Mehmed IV to authorize the largest military campaign in all of Ottoman history. Nothing would stop him. In the spring of 1683, Kara Mustafa began marching his colossal army northwestward, leaving a trail of fire and ruin behind them. The Ottoman army was a terrifying spectacle unlike anything Europe had seen. It stretched across the horizon for miles in every direction. Over 300,000 soldiers marched beneath the Ottoman crescent. Among them were the fierce Janissaries, the most elite warriors on earth. There were also hundreds of massive cannons, thousands of engineers, and entire cities' worth of supplies stretching back across the plains endlessly. Kara Mustafa even brought a magnificent golden silk tent city for himself, a grand palace on the move, worthy of an emperor. As this monster of an army moved through Hungary, towns and villages simply emptied. People fled in blind terror at its approach. Refugees poured into Vienna, carrying horrifying stories of massacres, burned cities, and total annihilation. The fear was absolutely suffocating the entire city. Emperor Leopold I, ruler of Vienna, made a decision that would haunt him forever. He abandoned his own city and fled. The emperor escaped westward with his court and gold, dignity intact, leaving 60,000 helpless civilians behind to face the Ottoman storm. Vienna was left in the hands of one single man, Count Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg, a brilliant but severely outnumbered military commander. Starhemberg had only 15,000 defenders to protect a city of 80,000 souls against the greatest army the world had assembled. On the 14th of July, 1683, the Ottoman army arrived before Vienna's walls. The greatest siege in European history had finally begun. Kara Mustafa's massive camp surrounded Vienna on 3 sides. The glittering crescent banners stretched further than any eye could possibly see clearly. Ottoman drums started beating night and day without stopping. That relentless thundering sound alone was designed to break the defenders' exhausted spirit. Starhemberg was not a man who broke easily. He forged his 15,000 soldiers into a ferocious and utterly determined defensive force. The Ottomans began digging tunnels beneath Vienna's massive walls. Their plan was to place enormous gunpowder mines and blow the walls apart. Inside the city, Austrian engineers crawled through the earth, listening desperately for vibrations, frantically trying to counter the Ottoman tunnels below them. The psychological warfare was as brutal as the physical battle. Every night, screams echoed across the walls as nearby villages burned brightly. Food inside Vienna began running dangerously low. Starhemberg rationed every scrap, every crust of bread, every drop of clean water most carefully. Disease began spreading through the overcrowded streets. Dysentery, starvation, and sheer exhaustion were killing as many defenders as Ottoman bullets and arrows. And yet, Vienna held. Every dawn, the Ottoman generals looked across the walls and found the same defiant banners flying high above. Meanwhile, deep in the tunnels beneath Vienna, a deadly invisible war was being fought in complete darkness, inch by terrifying inch daily. Ottoman miners buried massive barrels of gunpowder beneath the city walls. When they exploded, entire sections of stone crumbled and simply disappeared. Hundreds of janissaries stormed each breach the moment it opened, screaming their battle cries into the smoke, dust, and absolute chaos beyond. Starhemberg threw himself into every breach personally. He was wounded multiple times but refused to step back from the walls even once. The population of Vienna watched from rooftops and windows, praying desperately, crying openly, knowing their entire fate hung on these crumbling walls. By late August, Starhemberg made a devastating calculation. At the current rate of casualties, Vienna had perhaps 2 to 3 weeks remaining. He sent his most trusted messenger slipping secretly through Ottoman lines under the cover of complete darkness, with one final desperate plea. The message reached Emperor Leopold, who had been desperately trying to assemble a relief army from the scattered kingdoms of Christian Europe. But Leopold's pleas to European powers had mostly fallen on deaf ears. France, England, nobody wanted to commit their forces for Vienna. And then, as all hope seemed to be fading, one extraordinary man stepped forward from an unexpected corner of the Christian world. His name was Jan III Sobieski, King of Poland, the finest and most feared military commander in all of Christian Europe. Sobieski had spent his life fighting the Ottomans along Poland's southern borders. He knew their tactics, their weaknesses, and their deepest psychology. When Vienna's desperate message arrived, Sobieski did not hesitate for even a moment. He immediately began gathering his famous Polish winged hussars. The winged hussars were unlike anything the world had ever seen. Enormous armored knights with giant eagle wings strapped to their backs. When they charged, the feathers made an unearthly roaring sound that terrified enemy horses, shattered formations, and broke even the bravest spirit. Sobieski assembled a coalition force, Poles, Austrians, Germans, all marching together under a unified Christian banner toward the besieged city of Vienna. The combined relief army numbered around 70,000 soldiers, still vastly outnumbered but burning with desperate purpose and unshakable determination to win. They crossed mountain passes under cover of darkness, hiding from Ottoman scouts, moving as silently as possible through the forests of Austria. Sobieski reached the Kahlenberg Heights overlooking Vienna on the 11th of September 1683. He could see the Ottoman camp burning below him. That night, Sobieski fell to his knees and prayed. He attended Mass on the mountaintop, preparing his soul for tomorrow's world-changing battle. The 12th of September 1683, the day that would determine whether European civilization would survive or be forever consumed by the Ottomans. Before dawn broke, Sobieski addressed his generals with simple, powerful words that would be remembered and repeated across the centuries that followed. The Christian cannons opened fire from the Kahlenberg Heights at dawn. The thunderous roar shook the earth, waking every Ottoman soldier below. Kara Mustafa received the news with cold disbelief. A relief army? Here? Now? He had not expected this. Nobody had warned him. He made a fatal and catastrophic mistake. Instead of pulling back to fight the relief army properly, he split his forces dangerously. For hours, the battle raged across the slopes surrounding Vienna. The exhausted Christian forces fought with a ferocity born from absolute desperation. And then, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Sobieski personally raised his sword and gave the order for the greatest cavalry charge. 18,000 cavalry began moving as one, slowly at first, then faster, then at full speed into the heart of Ottoman lines. The ground shook. It was deafening. The winged hussars led the charge, their enormous wings roaring like a hurricane across the battlefield. Ottoman formations shattered on impact. Hardened soldiers who had never fled before now dropped their weapons and abandoned their proud defensive positions. Kara Mustafa watched his mighty empire unravel in mere minutes. 70 days of painstaking work was collapsing before his horrified, disbelieving eyes. The Ottoman Grand Vizier made the most humiliating decision of his life. He abandoned his golden tent and fled into the night. The Christian cavalry pursued the fleeing Ottoman army relentlessly. Centuries of fear, oppression, and desperate loss were finally being answered at last. Inside Vienna, Starhemberg heard the battle turning and wept. He had held these walls long enough. The rescue had finally, miraculously come. The city erupted in wild celebrations lasting 3 full days. Church bells rang without stopping. People wept and embraced in the streets. Kara Mustafa escaped the immediate battlefield, but he could not escape the Sultan's fury. Death came for him in Belgrade that December. Sultan Mehmed IV sent a silken cord to Belgrade, the traditional Ottoman method of execution for disgraced generals who had failed. Kara Mustafa, the man who dreamed of conquering Europe, was strangled with a silk cord on Christmas Day 1683. Justice had arrived. The Battle of Vienna was a monumental turning point. The Ottoman Empire would never again seriously threaten the heartland of Christian Europe. For 2 centuries after, the Ottoman tide slowly receded. Territory after territory was reclaimed. The long nightmare was finally beginning to lift. King Jan Sobieski rode home to Poland as the most celebrated Christian hero in Europe, forever hailed as the savior of Vienna. Pope Innocent XI declared September the 12th a feast day across the entire Catholic Church in memory of this extraordinary miracle. Historians later argued that had Vienna fallen in 1683, the entire course of Western civilization would have been fundamentally and permanently altered. There would have been no Enlightenment, no industrial revolution, no modern democracy, and perhaps no scientific age as we understand it today. Everything that makes the modern world, its freedoms, its science, its technology, may owe its very existence to those crumbling Vienna walls. The siege of Vienna was more than a military battle. It was a collision between 2 civilizations, 2 faiths, and 2 visions. The men who fought and died on both sides of those walls believed they were fighting for something far greater than themselves. Starhemberg, that wounded and exhausted defender, had held the impossible line through sheer stubborn force of will, buying time for humanity itself. And Sobieski, the winged king from Poland, had answered the call of history precisely when the entire world needed him most desperately. This is their story and ours. 60 days of terror, 1 extraordinary charge, and the civilization you call your own was saved.